I am thrilled. I have a legend today, Graydon Carter, who, is a household name in the world of publishing, media, celebrity, Hollywood, fashion, politics. So I guess he's kind of a household name everywhere. He's got a brand new book out, When the Going Was Good, An Editor's Adventures During the Last Golden Age of Magazines. He's the founder and co-editor of Airmail. He was the former editor of Vanity Fair for 25 years. He co-founded Spy Magazine. He was editor of The Observer. And the book is kind of a walk down memory lane when magazines were magazines. Welcome, sir.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, Donnie. I listen to you every morning on Morning Joe, at least when you're on, and so I'm thrilled to be here.
Thrilled to have you here. It's a little somber on Morning Joe these days, but we'll see what happens. We'll talk.
Somber everywhere. Yes.
Yeah. Well, you obviously have your history with Donald Trump. What was interesting was I didn't realize that your cover story that you wrote for GQ was basically kind of the first real mass expose or exposition of Mr. Trump.
Well, it wasn't an expose. It was a straight
story. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, sorry. And I spent 3 weeks with him in 1983 to do this story because he allowed me to hang around. And I don't in any way put myself in the scholarship ranks of people like you and Anthony Scaramucci. I'm sort of a junior Trump scholar.
Right.
But I didn't. There was one thing in the story. He didn't like the fact that I said that he hit the article was basically straight, but I did point out that something I noticed, that his hands were too small for his body. And he didn't like that. And but then when we went to Spy Magazine 2 years later, we had epithets for people. And the epithet we had for Trump, anytime we mentioned him, was we referred to him as a short-fingered vulgarian, and that he really hated.
Yeah, he was not happy about that.
I knew you were going to lead off with this.
Well, it just, what's interesting is, there was a great anecdote in the book when he sent you a picture of an ad from The Art of the Deal, and he just circled his hands and goes, "See, they're not small." You had an interesting response.
Well, no, this was 2016, just before he ran for president.
Right, and so this was maybe like 30 years later afterwards.
30 years after that ad must have run, and he sent it with gold Sharpie. He said, and circled his hand and said, "See, quite large." And I wish I should have just held on to that, but I stapled a card onto it. And I said, "Actually, quite small," and sent it back to him by messenger that day.
I'm sure he loved that. And you were a proud recipient of over 40 tweets that you have framed on your wall, or certainly
almost
framed 50.
Almost 50.
Wow.
Yes.
I only got a few.
Yeah. And so I sort of missed the attention from the good man.
You said, and I don't remember the exact quote, he's either going to end up and it was kind of nowhere or the most powerful man in the world. So you saw something early on.
Well, no, this was in 1987 or something. And I said, I think I was recording. I think I was just trying to be glib. But I said that he'll either wind up the most powerful man in the world or storing his urine in mason jars. The way Howard Hughes
did. That's right. It was a Howard Hughes reference. There is.
So, and who knows? Maybe I got it right on both counts. I don't know.
So I'm going to use a word for you that I think sums you up. And it was a word that now we use a lot, but wasn't used in that day. You were, to me, the first influencer. In what kind of I'm saying as somebody who's, look, I'm in the media world. I know your influence on politics, on culture. I hate the word pop culture, but on culture, who we are, what matters. And you were such a big deal for so long, and that you were the ultimate gatekeeper at what we thought about mattered. And I'm not blowing smoke up your ass. That's, as from a media guy, that's who you were and who you will be in history.
Well, the thing is, a lot of it had to do with the chair I was sitting in.
Yes.
So, especially the 1980s and the 1990s, really, magazines completely drove the culture, along with movies still then. But at the magazines I was at, you had influence over the culture, whether it's Spy or especially Vanity Fair, and. But yes, it was a testament to the overwhelming influence magazines had on what the culture was, what people talked about in the culture, in the way they don't now. That's impossible now.
You were not welcome with open arms at Vanity Fair. You did not have a easy beginning. In 92, you caught stride by about 94. Talk about those early days.
Okay, well, that's an understatement. No, we had spent 5 years making fun of Vanity Fair, of its editors, some of its writers, its sort of Baroque house style of writing. So when I showed up, Spy was essentially the anti-Vanity Fair. So when I showed up, there were a lot of grim-looking faces, because new editors can mean changes, which can mean unemployment. But I didn't get rid of anybody for 2 years, and I tried to work with everybody to get them around to the way I like to operate. I don't like office drama. I like people to work together, to be collegial. But after 2 years, there were three people that I could not bring around to my way of thinking, and there was more people I had ever fired in my entire life. But I got rid of them all in 1 week, and then things changed, and then I started getting my footing. We had done the Oscar party by then. We were planning an Oscar issue, or a Hollywood issue, and for the next 23 years, it was much better sailing.
Do you remember a moment? Was it an issue? Was it a cover? Was it a story where you went, okay, this is I got this now. This is where I want this book to be.
Yeah, but the last issue I produced, probably. I mean, the thing is, you forget, during that golden age, one reason why it was such a golden age is because magazines across the board were really good,
Yeah.
so that the competition was fierce, and we because we were a general interest magazine, we competed with everybody. We competed with the news weeklies. We competed with fashion magazines for fashion advertising. We competed with the New Yorker, with the Atlantic. It was constant competition, and that made everybody's game better. But it meant you could never quite sit back and say, "Okay, I've got this," and that never took place.
Give me the inspiration for the Hollywood issue, which I love the story that you talk about, the cover. I always wondered this on the gatefold, the celebrities that don't end up on the front, but I mean, it's still obviously very prestigious. What went into making that sausage? I can only imagine.
Well, the Hollywood issue, we did I'd gone to Swifty Lazar invented the Oscar
The
party.
party, yeah.
And he started at a restaurant called Bistro Gardens, and then moved it to Spago, Wolfgang Puck's restaurant. And he invited me the last year that he had it, and then he died. And
that'll teach him to invite you anywhere, right?
it's not the first time it's happened. And so then, he died in December, and I thought we could perhaps take it over. And we had till March. We had to move fast because the Oscars were in March in those days. And so we managed to pull that off. And Cy Newhouse, my boss, who was the boss of everything at
Sure,
Condé Nast at Random House, we were having lunch one day, and he said, "Have you ever thought of doing a Hollywood issue around the Oscars?" And I resisted it at first because I thought most people buy magazines, especially magazines like Vanity Fair, for the breadth of the story, the political scandal, the big literary story, the fashion contretemps, whatever it was. But he had brought it up again the next week. And so one night I was sitting at home in my kitchen editing, and I sort of started sketching down ideas of how I could do a Hollywood issue that would be broad enough that even if you weren't interested in a contemporary movie star, but we'd have great stories on old Hollywood and certain scandals and business stories involving Hollywood. And that became the mix for every issue. The covers, I thought, I couldn't think of a single, in 1984 or 5, whatever it was, I couldn't think of a single actor who could pull the whole thing together for the cover. So I'd happen to love group shots, like One Day in Harlem and things like that. And so I pulled together, I thought, let's do 3 panels and the size of a billboard. And so there was a lot of negotiation between the people on the first panel, people on the second panel, and people on the third panel, because the people on the first panel, those are the people you see when you see a magazine
table book, yeah,
on the newsstand or on your coffee table. But so the people on the first panel were happier than the people on the second panel, and the people on the second panel were happier than the people on the third panel. But everything was worked out before they got to Annie Leibovitz's studio. So there was no surprises. It wasn't, I was promised this and then I got that. Everything was worked out well in advance.
Annie and the visuals were a big part of the magazine. It was art. I mean, beyond the, and we're going to talk about a lot of the articles on the Dominic Dunns and the various people in the boroughs and the brilliant writers you work with, but it was a piece of art, your magazine, and a lot of it had to do with Annie.
Annie, and we spend a great, I do believe, and Christopher Hitchens mentioned this to me once, that magazines are half image, half words, and no magazine followed that line as closely as Vanity Fair. And I probably spent half my time on the visual aspects of the magazine and half my time on the written word. And having Annie, I had an asset that nobody else had. And so, and she resisted group shots at first. She thought they were a trick, and they were, in a way, other than you brought people together for an historic moment. And in our first Hollywood issue, we had other photographers taking some group shots, and they did them largely like high school pictures, with like short people in the front and taller people in the back.
Right.
Annie composed her pictures like the way old masters did. She would sort of compose the pictures and have the bodies sort of overlapping, and some people standing, some people sitting. And she would work all this out with stand-ins for the people on the cover. So by the time the people on the cover came for the setting, she knew exactly where everything was going to be. She knew what they were going to wear, and thank God, she got into it, and so she became the actual acknowledged global master of this. She's done it better than any photographer in history.
It really, the magazine, I remember you wait for it to come out. It mattered. The stories mattered. It's hard today in today's media for anything to matter for any period of time. And it's such a different, without stating the obvious, it's such a different landscape. And there was a comfort in that there was a magazine, there was a media vehicle that kind of set the table. And if there were 89 stories, you read every single one of them. It's hard to find something in media, in any central nervous system, that matters as much today.
Well, I think HBO still handles these things very well, so that, the water cooler TV shows like
White Lotus,
Succession, or White Lotus. I mean, those things still stand. And like in the week we're talking about, there's a show on, I think it's on Netflix, called Adolescence. That
somebody just told me about. They said that it's going to blow everything away. It's 4 episodes, and it's so fresh.
Yes, it'll be like nothing you've ever seen. And so that I think streaming services still have that. I think movies have lost that.
Yeah. When was the last time you were in a movie theater?
Oh God, I bet it was. I think it was Ford versus Ferrari, but I saw it in France as Le Mans 64.
That's
63, whatever it was.
But it is really, you're right about streaming, you're right about the movies, but I'm talking about, the Menendez story could just dominate, and it could dominate for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. It's ironic that there's a new story today, but it's so in our media culture now, particularly in the Trump media culture, where every day there is a new windstorm. It's hard for anything to kind of lock in and take heat in our culture and really matter.
Well, it is. It's like trying to get a cup of water from a fire hose. It's very difficult to try to sort of focus on any one thing. And you've got to remember that during the Menendez trial and the O.J. Simpson trial, especially, there were daily news dispatches from the courtroom every day in most major newspapers, and there were summaries in weekly magazines. We had a monthly that would take 3 weeks to assemble, to fact check, to lay out, and do all the rest, and then get it on the newsstand. And this is all pre-internet, so we had to not give the news. We had to sort of, and Dominic was brilliant at this. Dominic Dunn was brilliant at creating a narrative each month, and he would include things from dinner parties he'd gone to and things he had heard, and he was very good at working the corridors outside the courtroom, where he could talk to witnesses and talk to jurists, and he just managed to create a small opera every month that made it absolutely compelling, even though it came out long after the events that are in the story.
if you were today going to write it, if you were editing Vanity Fair today, and Vanity Fair was what Vanity, I'm not saying it's not, but you're running Vanity Fair and it has its place in the culture, and you were going to do a defining 10,000 word story on social media. It could be a little slice of a story that happened, and with everything that is about that. Where would that story? Would you do an issue of the influencers and cover story of 10 influencers? Where would you go with that? Because there are so many layers to it.
That's a good question. And I think it's really tough for editors now. I think the culture is so flattened out and spread. It's like a chicken paillard. It just goes on and on. The reason why I think this TV series Adolescence hits home is because it brings in all of those things of gun culture. You've got bro culture. You've got influencers. I mean, it's hard enough. It was hard enough being a teenager when we were young,
Yeah.
and it's brutal now with social media.
I have two teenage daughters. I mean, it's cruel. It is. Yeah. It is. We grew up, and you're a little older than me, but we're both over 50. Let's be gracious and say it that way. Yeah. But it was simple. Even if you were having a tough time in school, you went home and you turned things off, and you had. It's 24/7 being reminded what you're not at, what you're doing wrong, what you don't look like. It's brutal.
Well, I have 5 kids, 3 of them boys and 2 girls, and my oldest daughter is 31, and my youngest daughter is 16.
Okay, so you still got one at home, right? Okay, right.
And their childhood is
completely different. Completely different.
Yeah. I mean, my oldest daughter might as well have been brought up during the Depression compared to this.
Yeah. What do you have any rules of engagement on social media at home with your daughter?
Other than saying, my kids have no social media presence. I mean, no public presence or anything like that. None of my kids. And I say, come down, do your homework down here in the kitchen. And she's away at school most of the time. But every once in a while, I'll watch TikTok with her, and I can see why it's completely addictive. Yeah. And if it was around when I was 17 or 16, I probably never would have read a book.
I find myself like an idiot getting lost in what I call an Instagram hole, where I go on and I'm just scrolling, and it's candy. It's this weird. It's not an addiction, because I'm certainly not addicted to it, but it's like you can all of a sudden oh my God, I spent 30 minutes doing nothing, right? Absolutely nothing, and absorbing nothing, right? Except stuff,
right? I mean, you can see the addiction. I'm dying to read the book "Careless People" by the Facebook whistleblower,
right?
And I think all these things. It's funny because I think the iPhone is both one of the most brilliant things ever invented, and because we certainly didn't know we needed that.
I always say this is the death of us. It's
I mean, Steve Jobs didn't intend it this way. Other people took it this way. But it's like the invention of dynamite in a certain way.
Yeah. Now buckling with AI. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. So I love you must be proud of what you did, not what you did with, but your involvement in the turning around of Monica Lewinsky and her rehabilitation, the image that because it really, she today is seen as a hero, as a victim, and it's insane because it seems like another lifetime ago that she was the villain in that script early on, right. and your profile on her was a big part of turning that around.
Well, we stayed in touch through the entire period where she was trying to find herself, and then we sat down and we talked, and I had a friend, my wife and I have a friend in London. His name was Ant Gordon Lennox, and he had a business where they would take heads of state and heads of corporations and help them draft their story, write their story, and then how to deliver their story. So Monica went and spent 3 weeks with him, and she wanted to change her narrative, and so she and Ant worked on this, and then she came back and she did a big story for Vanity Fair and a TED Talk, and the narrative changed overnight because she was sort of, as she puts it, she was
the first social media victim, basically.
Patient zero in social media shaming. And part of my heart went out to her because I have 2 daughters, and I thought, if an American president had done that to my daughter, I would have been livid.
Yeah.
And how dare she become the villain, and he gets portrayed, and back then, as the victim.
Yeah, amazing. I remember years ago, I got a 5-page letter. I was still running my agency from Monica saying, I'm interested. I follow your career. I'd love to come talk to you about working at your agency. And I met her, and she was incredibly engaging and bright and likable. And I remember I brought her next door to my CEO. I said, we should find her a job as an account director, account supervisor. And the CEO said, we can't do that. We can't send her. And she had this scarlet letter on her, which was so unfortunate. That has the very thing
Right.
that defines her is the very, and it's a weird, and we ended up having dinner, and it's this weird thing where it's her reason for her celebrity or existence in the public culture, but yet it's the thing that kind of keeps her in a box, and it's this tragedy.
But that was then. That's not that.
Yeah.
That was back then, right?
Yeah.
I mean, no, she's a heroine now, and I have to do a thing with Book Soup out in Los Angeles next weekend, and Monica is going to be my interviewer.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, I see her anytime she comes to New York, and I'm really happy for her and proud of her, the way she's turned this whole story around. It wasn't easy, but she did it.
I want to talk a little bit about the Fame Party. There's one anecdote in the book about Adrian Brody stealing a lamp.
Yeah.
What have you not talked about that's happened one of those times at the parties? That's just one of these things that you just go, I can't believe this is actually happening.
Well, there's nothing I can say on a podcast that could be listened to by children, but there was incidents where you would have to pull somebody off somebody else doing something that should have been private in public, but most people were actually, and most of my parties were before the era of selfies and cell phones and all of that, so people felt, even though they knew they couldn't get photographed, and we wouldn't allow cameras into the party, that they sort of behaved themselves. By and large, most movie stars don't know that many other movie stars unless they've been in a movie with them, because they're working all the time.
Yeah.
So
that's interesting. That's really interesting. Yeah,
they were thrilled to meet other movie actors who they admired, and especially they were thrilled to meet some of the other people. We had a lot of artists, always, like people like David Hockney. They'd be thrilled to meet music people like Prince or Joni Mitchell. And so they were like as wide-eyed as anybody else there.
How many people would make the list on a given year? I know you got to a point where you had tiers at certain points where people were, you could only show up at 10:30 or you could show up at this time. But I can't even imagine what goes into making that soup.
Okay, so first of all, we'd start off with 500 people for dinner and winnow that down to about 160 or 170. And then we would invite for instance, so let's say you want to get the job that night is to get as many movie stars and as many people with Oscars into that one room as humanly possible. So if you want to get the Best Actor award with the Best Actor attached to it, you've got to invite the 5 candidates, the 5 nominees. So that's 5 invitations. They all have like wives or spouses or partners. Then often they want to bring their manager or their
of course,
their hair colorist. So then all of a sudden you got 25 people to get one statue in the room, and you start multiplying that across the other categories. But you wanted, I mean, it sounds really like more scientific than it was. We just wanted tons and tons of movie stars,
that's it.
and pro athletes and everything like that. So and also the fire marshal, the Beverly Hills fire marshal, would stand outside the party with a clicker. So you're only allowed a certain number of people into that marquee at any given time. And so we had to schedule people to come. Some people came right after the awards. Some people came at 9:30. Then there's 10:30, 11:30, 12:30. That was to hopefully not overload the place. And probably only in 3 or 4 occasions did the fire marshal stop people coming in. But we had an express lane, so anybody with an award sort of went in
The easy pass, easy pass, right?
the HOV lane,
Right.
So, um, yeah, no, it was. I'm sure we got some things wrong, but by and large, it worked.
You were kind of front and center of what I'll call just the pinnacle of our celebrity culture, and you had a lot of words you wouldn't let your staff you use in within Vanity Fair. A-list,
like the word celebrity.
Yeah, like or A-lister. What is there any thread with all the celebrities and all the covers that you've done and all the profiles and intimate connections you've had with any thread that you see between where people really, when people are the kind of on the super sphere on the top of things, is there any kind of lessons learned from a guy that's had the front row?
By and large, the people who, when we were choosing covers, I tried to choose people who would have staying power, not just for the month they were on the cover, but that we would look wise having put them on the cover, and they weren't a flash in the pan. And by and large, if you enter that world and you succeed over a 10-year, a 20-year, a 30-year period, the chances are you're a really good person. Because
I found that in business. I found that in business also.
100%.
Not the middle level, but you meet the top people. There's obviously they're talented, but they wouldn't be there if they didn't have people rooting for them, if 100%. They didn't understand other people's successes.
100%. I mean, there's exceptions to that, like people like Harvey Weinstein. But by and large, most people I know at the top in Hollywood, we'll just talk about Hollywood, they're really decent people, and and they care for others. And the ones who are not decent, then I think what happens is people think, unless they're just so talented that you can't ignore them, and most people are not, that most people think, life's too short. I'd rather choose the other guy.
You have an interesting anecdote in the book about Harvey, about running into him in a restaurant and ending up outside. And, everybody's got a Harvey story, but this one is particularly interesting.
Well, I mean, we were at this restaurant called Atlantic, and it was before the Oscars, and he was about to start Talk Magazine with Tina Brown. And he was sitting with a bunch of young actresses, and I was leaving the restaurant with two friends of mine. And he said, Hey, Graydon, I got to talk to you. And I said, yeah. And he said, I hear you're doing a big takedown of us in Vanity Fair. And I thought for a moment, I said, no, we're not. You must be mistaken. He said, because I'll tell you something. We could do a huge takedown on you at Spy and all the sex and drugs at the magazine. And well, first of all, I knew immediately this was a blind threat because nobody at Spy was paid enough to have drugs. Right. And so he said, something, and this is where he'd obviously seen too many movies. He said, let's take this outside. So I thought, oh, fuck. I mean,
you're in a fist fight with this guy. Right.
This is not a good look for anybody. Yeah. So we go outside. The moment we hit the cool night air, he's hugging me and saying how great he thinks Vanity Fair is and that he hopes Talk will be as good as that. And I realized this was all show for the young women who were at his table.
You obviously had such a front row seat to Hollywood and business and movies. What were the rumblings over the years you'd hear about Harvey? Because obviously the story is a tragic one and a horrific one. And Harvey's where he belongs right now, obviously. What were the rumblings you heard? Not that you did a piece on it, but what were the rumblings?
Other people have tried. The New York Times tried. I remember talking in my garden with David Carr, who was trying to do a story on this. And this was a good while ago. And Harvey moved in. We lived on a very quiet block in the West Village. Harvey bought the house right across from us. And he and his wife, Georgina, she was lovely. And he was perfectly fine as a neighbor. But it was sort of extreme casting couch behavior. I knew nobody who had particular details. It was just a rumble.
Yeah, while we're in that category, you did a big profile on Epstein, and there was a whole thing with you and Vicky Ward about how there were accusations from two sisters, but they didn't want to be a part of it. So you understandably didn't run it, and Vicky years later is still carrying on about this.
No, she's like long COVID. Yeah, she just won't go away.
What was I don't remember the Epstein profile, but what was the essence of it?
Well, it's just something I was reading. He kept popping up in page 6. And I'd never heard of him, but it was in the days when not everybody that you read about in the papers had a private plane, but he had a private plane and he was flying people like
Clinton.
a lot of Clinton around, and I thought, who is this guy? So I signed the story, and because it was the first major story on him, but if I hadn't been reading about him in Page Six, I would have known about him.
I mentioned Monica Lewinsky and the benevolence of the story you did. Are there any stories that you did that you're sorry you did because, well, XYZ happened as a result of what we did?
No, I'll tell you a story. One of my favorite magazine stories while I was at Vanity Fair, I didn't publish. And it was Buzz Bissinger, is a Pulitzer Prize winner, wrote Friday Night Lights, is a wonderful writer. And he wanted to do a story about his clothing obsession. And I was talking to his editor, Dana Brown, and I said, that doesn't sound like us. That sounds like sort of a GQ type of story. And so he took it to GQ and he wrote it and published it. And it was one of the most fascinating stories I'd read in years, because Buzz, who was a very buttoned down Ivy Leaguer, all of a sudden developed an absolute passion for Gucci leather clothing and spent something north of $500,000 on this. And he spent so much money on Gucci that they would invite him to be in the front row at the fashion shows. And it was just it was a story that I had never really considered, and I wished I had.
I want to drift into politics a little bit, not into politics itself, but since you have a history with Trump, explain to me from a culture point of view while Donald Trump is president right now, without going into all the Democratic Party, this and that, as somebody who has just been such an arbiter of taste and what people want and what drives culture. I'm curious the Graydon Carter now.
Well, do you think he thinks he has taste?
Do I?
You know,
yes,
well.
yes. Do I think he thinks he has? I always thought what's interesting is that he was in on the joke, that he kind of, with his gold and his everything like that, that it's just kind of part of the shtick. And I don't know if that's true.
Well, and you might be right. It may be the way, say, Hunter Thompson, he had this reputation of being on, cocaine and doing drugs all the time, that he had to maintain that to sort of keep the brand stable of Hunter Thompson. And maybe Trump would like a nice English rose cottage with chintz and wisteria climbing up on the walls. But it's a certain type of taste, and as it turns out, it's dictator style.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, they all slightly live like, look at Saddam's palace and the pictures of Putin's place. It's not a bright time in America, and the world now distrusts us, and some actively dislike, especially our allies in the West.
Yeah, how about up north where you're from? Not exactly loving the U.S.
I'm very proud of the way Canada's handled this, and it makes me really proud to be a Canadian. And Mark Carney is a very clever, very wise fellow with a very dry sense of humor, and I think he'll run rings around Trump if they get into the same room together. He's used to handling big figures like him, and it's an America I didn't recognize, but I do now.
Yeah,
and it makes me feel. Men do not come off looking good in all of this.
Yeah, that we got this new bro culture that is something
it's
that
not appealing.
It's not. I mean, the definition of masculinity and this kind of very macho. Something's going to give. Something's going to give.
Well, first of all, in what dictionary is the definition of masculinity, including constant whining, constant retribution, and picking on the little guy? Those are not elements of proper masculinity.
One thing I can't understand about Trump is if you go on the premise that he wants to be loved, he wants adulation across the board, he could have it. If he left a lot of the stuff behind, he's got his people. He's got passionately. He's got 50% or 48%. He could get a big chunk of those other people.
No, he's like Led Zeppelin when he travels. I mean, in fact, the crowds turn up. It's a big thing in a small town if he rolls into town with a big airplane, and he's got like these red cap people who will follow him anywhere. I don't know why he has to be in office. It's a lot of work being president, I assume. And he's like old.
Yeah, he's not. Well, he doesn't seem like when you think that he's only 4 years younger than Biden. I'm really disappointed as a Democrat. I'm an independent at this point because what the party stands for now. I have no idea. They're lost. They've lurched too far left. They are. I've never remember either party being so broken right now.
Well, it's funny because somebody's going to come out of the bushes, I think, for the Democrats, and it may be somebody they don't expect. And I
have a premise that it's Fetterman. He's the ultimate character, and we need characters. And
I actually thought Joe Scarborough would be great.
Joe Scarborough would be amazing. He would be amazing. He would be great.
He's got a voice. He's got presence. He's got.
I mean,
left and right. He knows the business, and he toyed with it 10 or 12 years ago, I remember.
Yes. Stranger things have happened. He obviously he's a passionate centrist at this point. Yep. He commands a room. Yep. He would be fantastic. He really would.
Okay, there we go.
Who else coming out of the bushes?
Let's talk to him about
it. We it's something that he's going to get pissed at me about this, but it's something that gets bandied about.
His wife's, grew up with politics in her family. I mean, better than a reality TV star.
So tell me what life is like now. You got the book coming out. The book's out today. You sold your townhouse in the West Village?
We sold our house during the pandemic because at some point it had 4 floors plus a working basement.
And your kids are all gone for the most part.
4 of my kids were gone. They had their own places. And believe me, if you left something on the top floor, I'd buy a new one on Amazon.
I'm doing this from my townhouse, my 6-story townhouse right now, so I understand.
Well, you probably have an elevator.
I have an elevator. Yes, I do.
Okay, we didn't.
Don't I sound like a schmuck? I sound like somebody who was in Vanity Fair at one point. Actually, they did. George Wayne did an interview. I made Vanity Fair. So we know it's not. We know it's not for A-listers because I made it in there. So somehow,
No, you're A-list, if we can use that word. No, we there's a building just slightly east of where we lived, and we always loved, and we have an apartment here. We have a house in Connecticut that I've been up there for 40 years, and we spend a lot of time in France, and so life is okay.
Life is okay. Graydon Carter, I appreciate it. I've always been a big fan. You've held
Me too, Donnie.
Thank you. You've held a big place in the way I looked at the world for a lot of years. The book that's just out that's going to be a runaway bestseller, When the Going Was Good, and the Editor's Adventures During the Last Golden Age of Magazines. If you're anybody interested in culture, what was, what should be, what is, this is a must read. Go out and get it. Thank you, Mr. Carter.
A lot of hockey. Yes.
A lot of what?
Hockey.
Seriously, congratulations and well done on a career that's still going. Let's talk about airmail a little bit before we go.
Okay, sure. Okay.
So airmail is basically arrives on your Saturday mornings. And give us a quick synopsis of what.
Well, I started when I was in France because I read all the foreign papers, and I thought there's so many interesting stories, often about America, that didn't make it into the U.S. press, and I thought I could put together a package of interesting stories that people I know would like. And so we built a business of it, and it's the most magazine-looking thing you can find on the internet because it was built by magazine people. And it's basically, if Vanity Fair had a weekly dispatch, this is what it would be like.
It's Vanity Fair for the current times, right? Any regrets?
Oh, a million. Are you crazy?
Give me the top one.
Oh my God! I should have gone to Turkey and had hair plugs during the pandemic.
No, your hair is a big part of your brand. No, don't fuck with that. No,
it's disappearing. No, other than going to Turkey during the pandemic, no, all is good.
Graydon Carter, I really appreciate the time.
Thanks, Donnie.
All right, you stay well. Everybody, thanks for watching. If you like it, hit that subscribe button. And we love having you here watching On Brand. And just don't miss any future episodes. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.